Good evening all, and welcome. There are some things in life that you should never do. Making a pact with a demon is something that I would certainly put on that list. However, sometimes demons are invoked of their own accord and can present themselves in terrifying ways. I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable. Have your chalk in hand to let the darkness take control. I've experienced several things throughout my 36 years that could be unexplained supernatural occurrences. When I was a kid in particular, I had some recurring harassment that would make me afraid to be in my room. Enough so that my mother purchased me one of those little red bed tents that us kids in the 80s liked so well. I ran into some odd situations while at sea in the Navy too. Anyway, I had essentially forgotten about most of my previous experiences I had because I became somewhat of a closed-minded skeptic. Even weird things that cropped up as an adult, I noted were odd and that I couldn't explain, but I would dismiss them as just being personally unaware of the science behind whatever it was that I'd be witnessing. 3 years and maybe some change ago, the VA accidentally declared me dead, which had just been one in a series of negative events in my life that had started a sort of decline in my expectations for what the future could hold. During that time, a buddy of mine who was like a brother that I had known since I was 6 moved in with me. As his life was also spiraling downwards, together one night, we decided to watch a bunch of YouTube videos on how to summon demons and trade things for a better future. I also had 2 girls related to an ex-girlfriend of mine who needed to escape their abusive family living with me in my finished basement. The basement had no entry from the house. You have to leave the house just to access it. So it was like their own little apartment. And a good deal for a 21-year-old and 18-year-old, considering how I let them stay rent-free, as long as they helped with my sons, helped with cleaning, and cooked 2 meals a week. They'd come into this later. For now, they were just the ones that had suggested to my buddy and myself that we should look for videos about bargaining with the supernatural. The videos weren't particularly helpful, but we decided to start easy and went with the poor man's Ouija, the game called Charlie. I'm sure everyone is aware of what it is, but just in case you're not, you place a pencil on a piece of paper, split it into 4 squares with yes and no written in opposite corners. One pencil sits in the center and the other pencil is balanced on top of it. Then you say things like, "Charlie, is X true?" And then the top pencil is supposed to spin gently towards the yes or no answer. We did this a few times, and we had enough success that my buddy actually posted a video of the pencil turning on its own to his Facebook account. Invigorated by our success and the potential to gain loot from whatever we made a deal, we smoked a bunch of super dank reefer and came up with what could essentially be our trade template. We were operating under the assumption that everyone who traded their soul to the devil had done such in a rush to be famous or rich, that they didn't care about their part of the trade or how unbalanced it might be for them. We came up with a 30 for 30 trade. You see, I was around 33 when we decided on this, and figured 30 years really wasn't that bad to live as a soul enslaved to a malevolent entity, for a trade of 30 years alive as a successful human. That bargain in mind, I bothered my cat until it scratched me enough for me to bleed, and I pressed my thumb into the cut, and then onto the Charlie paper. This, I believe, was the catalyst for the rest of the weird stuff that had continued to this day. My buddy refused to put his own blood on the paper, He was raised Christian and steadily became less involved and more just a witness as I pushed forward. I don't remember verbatim what I said, but essentially I laid out my deal, my expectations and my offering. I offered up 30 years of service to whatever after my death, for 30 years of wealth and influence. I didn't want fame. Fame seemed like more work than it's worth. I just wanted to have enough loot to make sure my 2 sons, who live with me 100% of the time, were taken care of forever, and that I could live out the rest of my days feeling successful because I had loot, regardless of how I got to obtaining it. The pencil didn't spin. The lights did not flicker. There was no sudden cold breeze. My buddy and I did have a simultaneous sensation of being watched, however. We both turned around to see if the girls had come into the house, or if one of my sons had woken up. Nothing. We were alone. My buddy slept on one of the sofas, and I fell asleep on my recliner sofa in front of my coffee table, where the bloody Charlie game was at rest. I slept easy, even though I felt a bit uneasy, as if someone was staring at me as I urinated. That's kinda how I felt, but nonetheless slept. When I awoke, I followed my usual routine. I didn't even consider the night before until I grabbed my coffee cup. My buddy was still asleep. I typically wake up earlier than anyone else in the house, and I sat down in the same spot I had slept. And as I went to place my coffee down, I noticed an odd handprint on my coffee table facing me. The fingertips were pointed towards where I had slept. I actually took a picture of it because it was so strange. It was smaller than my handprint. The fingers were thinner, and there were only 4 digits, 3 thumbs and a finger. The weird part was, the nails seemed to have left an impression on the table too, as there were pointed claw-looking impressions. When I say impressions, I don't mean the wooden table was scarred. What I mean is its dark surface, and it looked like someone had placed a hot, sweaty, oddly shaped hand there, not long enough to leave a smudgy white imprint. That's why the claw impression just being there seemed odd. That, and only 1 hand impression was there. Not 2, just the 1 4-digit hand. I put my hand next to it. My hands were much too big. My buddy's hands were too big, and my youngest hands were too small. My oldest son's hands were too small. The girls came up from the basement, and before they told me about their night, I interrupted them and had them put their hand next to the impression on the table. Both hands were too small. Then they told me that I had kept them up all night. They thought my buddy and I had gotten drunk and were jamming out to 90s rock and metal. Truth be told, that's a legitimate assumption. We do that. But the night prior, we hadn't. In fact, we hadn't had a single drink, and we had turned off the videos after we came across the Charlie game. The only noise had been us talking excitedly at some points. The girls, however, said that there was a bunch of loud thumping and constant heavy music. In their words, but they consider Korn heavy music. The 18-year-old swore she thought that we had legitimately had a party going on with even more of our friends. My sons, however, heard nothing. It was weird, but we all sort of dismissed it as odd and noteworthy, but nothing more. That night, my buddy and I looked at some more videos about demons and bargaining with them. We watched a video that claimed that just by watching you were participating in a demonic summoning. As the night went on, things around the house seemed more uneasy. My buddy and I were both feeling unnerved, and every noise the house made seemed unnatural. Eventually, we turned on Aqua Teen Hunger Force and passed out. The same places as the night before. The following morning, the coffee table that I had since wiped down, erasing the previous prints, now had 2 of the same impressions on it, both facing me as the ones from the previous morning. The only noticeable difference is that there were 2 prints and that the thumbs were again in the same place as the human thumbs. However, once again, only 4 digits and odd claws pointed towards where I had slept. My eldest son immediately became worried and claimed that I was being haunted by the Rake from the famous creepypasta. I confessed, creepypastas are whack to me, so I wasn't familiar with this story at the time, and I took time to watch a few versions explaining it. I wasn't impressed, and it didn't resonate with me as a sensible answer to what I had been witnessing. Only the claws and the insinuation that something had been watching me fit. The girls claimed to have another rough night this time. However, it wasn't noises upstairs. It was the lights in the basement turning on and off, and the sound of something scratching at their door, and one door that leads outside in the woods at the edge of my property. We live in the woods on a mountain with a few acres of land, so the idea of something scratching on the door isn't too far from likely. I've even had bears roam my land, so something scratching at the door is certainly not unheard of around here. The girls continued having nights of being freaked out. Despite that, after the 3rd morning of handprints, I had stopped being involved with any odd event. The girls grew so frightened they moved upstairs and slept on the other 2 sofas. So now the 4 adults in the house slept in the living room, while my son slept in their own rooms. I have my own bedroom, but I just don't like sleeping in beds. The girls continued to have odd experiences in the bathroom, feeling like they were being watched, the shower curtain being pulled back when no one was in the room. My sons both woke up with what appeared to be cat scratches on their chest one morning. They seemed superficial enough, but they were spooked because my cats will suffer anything except me using them to dust tables. That's how I got them to scratch me for the original game of Charlie. One night, all 4 of us heard the scratching at the door, this time on the upstairs door and not the basement. As a combat vet, I have firearms, so my buddy and I step outside and search the immediate area. We kept hearing rustling, so we followed it around the edge of the property until we got down by the basement. We both noticed the light was on, but my buddy was the first to notice movement through the windows. In order to prevent air leaks, the few windows the basement has are covered with weatherproof plastic, so we could only make out the shadow of a head moving back and forth. Whoever it was certainly didn't belong in my basement, and especially not at night time. We came around the door, which was already opened, and yelled into the basement that we were armed, and that by coming forward now, they would be safely escorted from the property, whereas jumping out could lead to being injured. But there was no response. No sound, but all the lights were on, and the door had been wide open. The majority of my basement is open space, with just one finished room, save a missing door. The older girl had stayed there, and she had hung a blanket in place of a door. My buddy was standing behind me, and when I moved the blanket hanging in the door, all the lights in the basement shut off. A totally audible snap too. My buddy called out, "What is it?" and ran outside, and I followed him out behind his movements later. He was genuinely spooked when I came out, and told me he had run out because he was certain I had pushed past him in the dark and ran out ahead of him. So when he said, "What is it?" he thought he was talking to me running past him, despite the fact I hadn't moved until he left the basement. I closed the door and put a cement block in front of it. We went back upstairs, put the rifles away, and described what happened. Upstairs the power had gone out too, but when the girls had gone to the breaker box, which is upstairs in a broom closet by some weird 70s design, the power came back on without an issue. Perhaps to the basement as well, though I'm unsure whether we noticed it did or not. The girls moved out, They still keep in touch and visit, but won't stay overnight because they're afraid of whatever I did. They definitely think I lost something when I tried to make a deal. I've repeatedly pointed out to them that I've received no such bounty as stated in the deal I offered, and they pointed out that just a couple of months after the Charlie game, the VA finally fixed their mistake about my status and began paying me again. They also noted that soon after the game my writing had been noticed, and I have been making money with that and gained a smallish following. They also pointed out that my buddy sold his house. Yes, he had a house even though he was living with me, and for a life-changing amount of money, which he used to travel for a while before coming back to this area. There continued to be odd circumstances around the house. We've seen odd footprints in snow and mud outside of the house on the patio, and around the cars. We've heard noises in the basement and around the house. Once, the steps to the attic have been pulled down and left open for some reason. I wake up sometimes with inexplicable scratches on my head, arms or legs, but again all superficial. I don't have any scars from them. At this point I can't rule out cats. I'd scratch me in my sleep too, if I'm used for a dust rag for kicks. The running joke is that Charlie needs to come out of his pockets if he's going to harass the household. My life is on the upturn now, but I certainly didn't receive what I was expecting for the offer I made. The girls have told me they think I let something loose that is essentially angry with me that my deal isn't weighted in its favor, so it's stuck being a minor annoyance. While I make fun of it for not giving me any of my loot, 30-30 is a fair trade, and I stand by it, and it'll need to make more than a trivial paw print to change my mind on that. The year of 2013. I moved into one of the 4 houses that came from Stephenson Island in the late 1800s. A lot of loggers had died on that island. Well, I was supposed to get the basement for my room. As soon as I stepped into that house, an eerie presence hit me. I felt uneasy. The feeling grew worse descending into that basement. The crawl space was boarded off. I was a very depressed teenager, cutting, debating ending it all, the fun stuff. What I didn't know was something was feeding off it. My room at night had an eerie feeling. I kept the lights completely off and immediately went to sleep after this, because you would see figures of people in the room standing over you and watching you intently. At this time, I believe they were merely curious about my family's presence in the house, basically them wondering what we were doing at their place. So skip forward half a year later. Weird occurrences start happening. I lost my sketchbook, and my sketchbook is my baby, and I would never lose that. I also had shavers being thrown at me in the shower. My brother and I were sitting on the couch playing video games during the end of winter and heard metal scraping across the attic floor above us. Now I know that sound. It wasn't just any metal, it was a metal chair scraping across a wooden floor. I tell my brother, and he doesn't want to believe it. Fast forward a few more months, I finally find my sketchbook in the weirdest place. Because for one, I'm always in my room, because my depression is eating me alive, and 2, I would never place my sketchbook so perfectly in front of the door. I came home, opened my door, and there the thing was, in front of the door perfectly in the middle. I felt weird but shrugged it off. A week later, my brother left his bowl of mac and cheese in the kitchen. He came back and watched it stop moving towards the edge of the counter. He doesn't believe in this type of stuff, but even he can't explain that. I started becoming more of a positive and happy person, and then moved out into the living room to sleep, because my mother and father cannot sleep in the same bed anymore comfortably due to her sickness. So my dad took the room. I took the living room, and the first night I was petrified. Yes, my brother slept on the other couch, but I was scared, very scared. I had a direct view into the kitchen where the basement was, and if I tried looking another way, I'd see into the bathroom. So I thought, let's just look in the bathroom instead. Wrong. I was so wrong it was almost bad. You could see figures going back and forth, and I ended up shutting the door like the chicken that I am. But then bam, I wanted to take pictures because it calms me down. I happened to be using Snapchat. I didn't think anything of these pictures until people began messaging me, saying things like, "What the hell is that? There's a demon thing standing in your kitchen." So personally, I felt scared. I went to bed that night, only to be struck by sleep paralysis. I had sleep paralysis for a month non-stop. This is where things got really bad. I lay on my couch stuck, not being able to move, scream, and just look around frantically. This creature lifted me up and made me levitate, and opened my legs and started tugging at the hem of my skinny jeans, as I used to wear skinny jeans to bed because I didn't have pajamas, but I had skinny jeans. Another spirit intervened and threw the creature down. I, still in the air, finally get out of the sleep paralysis, fall and hit my head, got up and ran into my mother's room scared and crying. Imagine a 14 or 15-year-old asking if they can sleep with you because of sleep paralysis. After that night, I started to not sleep as much. I didn't want to sleep after that, but I give in one night and regret that night. I awoke to my cat's bed being dragged away from me towards the basement. I had it. I'd had it with this thing. It could mess with me, but not my baby. I threatened to seal it away in the basement and attic if it didn't stop messing around with my family and our cats. It's one thing to mess with me, but my family and cats is something else. I told it I didn't want to seal it away, but that we could live in harmony together. Luckily, it stopped everything besides the shadow creatures and occasionally hiding my shirt and throwing shavers at me. Ever since I moved out, my family has had very few problems with this entity. The shadow creatures will not leave my father alone. He recently told me he felt the same way about that room, and that if you ever open your eyes you can see a figure hovering over the bed. My brother leaves the bedroom door closed, so I'm sure he doesn't want to admit he's having issues with shadow creatures as well. Back in the summer of 2012, I was in my high school, and then over the summer break, I had become absolutely obsessed with this show called The Supernatural. The story of two brothers, Sam and Dean Winchester, hunting monsters and demons. It was my absolute favorite. I've always had a knack for digging deep into the paranormal world, a little too interested about the other side, and watching the show only piqued my interest in this. I do not know how many of you hearing this have actually watched it, and even if you haven't, I'll give you a little context regarding the next part of my story. So in the initial seasons, they used to show exorcisms and various rituals, chanting spells and all that jazz. Watching those really intrigued me, so I wanted to look into this a little more and see for myself if the spells and such were real. I had the power of the internet at my disposal, and so one day in the middle of the night, I hopped onto Google and started typing keywords like demon, spell, witchcraft, etc. After pursuing through the contents of various sites, I was getting tired when I finally came across this one. Oh, I wish I could remember the name. The site had the most amazing spells, white magic to dark, summoning fairies to demons. It had it all. Being young and naive, I chanted the spells out loud. I started with fairies and moved on to demons. Yes, just a tiny detail. All these spells required a few ingredients, or had to be performed a specific day under the moon, or in the forest, or whatever. I didn't follow any of these rules and went straight for the spells. The spells were long, and I have the attention span of a hummingbird, so I read them out loud for only half the spell, and by the time I was done, it was pretty late, so I crashed on my bed and fell asleep. I woke up the next morning with backaches, probably from sitting in front of the computer for too long, with 3 long nail marks on one of my thighs. It was red and sore. I immediately checked my own nails to rationalize the situation and saw my nails had not grown since the last time I had them trimmed, and I sleep alone. This was the first incident, which I brushed off. For that time, I went about with my day. Until later that night, I hopped on the computer and began going through those spells again. But tonight something happened. I couldn't sleep the entire night. I kept waking up in the middle of the night and thought I had a sinking feeling that I was being watched in my sleep, or that there was someone standing near my bed. I could properly get some sleep when the sunlight creaked through the gaps of my windows when I finally woke, and what I encountered made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. There were 3 more marks this morning, long, deep ones, 3 on my other thigh and 3 on my left arm. Now I was scared. I had watched enough horror films and TV series to know what was happening. I concluded that I was being haunted by some kind of evil entity. Why the marks otherwise? I guess I was reading out the spells, and I had done it too diligently and actually summoned a demon. I told my parents what was happening, and at first they didn't believe me. Then I showed them the marks, and they tried to somehow rationalize it with me. I kept trying to convince them, and this night I didn't dare open my computer, and again had more restless sleep, waking up often with the feeling of being watched, and again the next morning. You guessed it, more red marks, now on my right arm and a few on my back. Even though I had stopped going on the site, and this ordeal continued for a few weeks, before suddenly out of the blue it stopped. I realized this because I could finally sleep peacefully again, and there were no new marks. Over the years I've shared this story to many people, and no one could give me a proper answer as to why it happened, or what it was. If you have any theories, I'd be grateful to hear them. I was raised Catholic and became an atheist around when I started middle school. I did not come out to my parents about being an atheist until I was well into college, so I spent my teenage years pretending to be Catholic. Several times when I was a kid, I would get a bad premonition feeling in the middle of the night that were basically panic attacks. I was certain that I was going to die, or that something bad was about to happen. When I told my mum about these, she would encourage me to pray until the feeling went away. So one night in high school, I wake up with this feeling again. I feel like there's something watching me, even though my bedroom is well lit by a nearby streetlight, and there's nothing there. Whenever I hear someone say that they felt a presence, I think of this moment. My senses give me no indication that there was anyone around, but I was certain that there was, despite all evidence to the contrary. I thought that they must be darting in and out of my vision faster than I could blink, or that they had managed to get under my bed somehow without opening the closed and locked window and door to my room. After laying in bed, panicked for what felt like hours, my sister calls out to me from her room across the hall. She had heard a voice and thought/hoped it was me, but it wasn't. I lied and said it was so that she wouldn't be scared. We both got out of bed and went to get my mother. She saw the look on my face and got out her Bible and sat us all down in the living room. I panicked even more because I had no faith in what she was about to do would be helpful. I don't know where I heard it, but I remember someone once saying something about there being loads of people who didn't believe in God, but they believe in the devil. I didn't believe that my mum's praying was going to help, but I did believe that whatever I was feeling was evil with a capital E. My sister, who was a year younger than me, started to cry after our second Our Father. She was, and still is, fiercely religious, and this was the first time that she had ever experienced the middle of the night dread the way that I had when I was a kid. Even though I didn't believe the words, I said them anyway. Now that I'm in graduate school to be a mental health counselor, I can in retrospect say that repeating a mantra of familiar words that were once comforting and reassuring would naturally help calm someone in my state. However, I didn't feel calmer as we continued to pray. I only felt increasingly anxious that something awful was about to happen. I noticed my mother getting louder and louder with every word, and I couldn't tell if she was angry, scared, or both. I followed suit and became louder, but the presence didn't go away. Without any warning, there was a loud bang, like a gunshot, and the floor shook as though it had happened right next to us. I distinctly remember facing the heavy glass door to the patio and seeing it vibrate. We were all stunned into silence. As a kid, nothing was scarier than seeing my parents scared, and the look of wide-eyed terror on my mother's face at that moment is burned into my brain. Pretty much immediately, the panic I felt subsided. My mother stood up and walked into the patio door to look outside. Then she looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. My father slept throughout all of this, without even stirring, and could not believe that the house shook so much without waking him. To this day, my mother is positive that we banished a demonic presence from the house. I myself have no idea what happened, but I know that I felt in my heart that I was doomed, and I felt the house shake in a way that I still cannot explain away rationally. My friend and I had a long day filled to the brim with fun and adventure, joyous and whimsical things. After we had spent most of the day in the downtown portion of Charleston, enjoying the cool breeze, watching the rough waters roll against the docks, we decided it would be best to head back before nightfall. Some time had passed, and we eventually arrived back in our city of Somerville, but our appetite for the fun and excitement hadn't been sated yet, so we decided to drive around and look at a newer town that had been added close to us, the town of Summers Corner. It was a nice town, sure enough, but it felt off, unreal. It was heavy and almost suffocating, the feeling that was there, that wouldn't deter us, as we were quite the resilient bunch, always moving forwards, keeping a smile on our face, even if the circumstances are pure, unadulterated agony. About a half hour into the drive, we discovered a street called Navajo Boulevard, which had immediately interested us, as the name itself is similar to the Native American tribe of the Navajo people, just with a slight spelling differential. These Native Americans live in the southern United States and are a great, proud people. They have many traditions with their tribes, with one such telling of a frightful creature. This creature is pure evil, a true monster among men. It is known as the Yenaldushi, and is a shape-shifting, vile, heart-wrenched fiend. We started to drive down the road, our windows rolled down so that we could enjoy that cool southern breeze. It's a dark, starry night, and while beautiful above us, the feeling from earlier was thicker and almost encumbering. Immediately I felt watched, not by the nightlife, which we noticed was eerily silent, but by something else. Whatever was watching us didn't want us there at all. It felt as though, whatever it was close to us. Its presence was intimidating and quite malicious, not to mention that it put us on edge, our eyes peeled, and ourselves readied for whatever may happen next. What seemed like an hour or so had passed, when suddenly, where there had been no wind before, a heavy gust slammed itself against the car, nearly pushing it off the road and into the woods. Our hearts were about to beat out of our chests from the shock of it all, or at least mine was. Just then, as I tried to keep us on the road, we saw something pass by the car. It was grotesque, mottled with malice and spiteful things. Its eyes, as pale as silver as the moon, gazed into our souls, sending nothing but fear throughout our bodies. We were motionless now, shrinking into our seats as this abomination grew closer. It unhinged its jaw and let out a horrific scream, snapping us back to reality. I put the car in gear, and we drove the hell out of there. Unfortunately, the feeling was intensified as we got back onto the road and sped away, another gust of wind slamming into the car. Suddenly, my friend had yelled for me to look out the window. Right behind my seatbelt on the outside of the car was that monster, and that's when I saw this awful thing in its entirety. It had reddish pale skin and eyes that seemed to have no end, with goat and reptilian slits for pupils. The horns from atop its forehead gave it a demonic appearance, our fear intensifying beyond belief as a result. It unhinged its maw and revealed a row of sharp and twisted teeth. A hand with long claws stretched at the glass, making us scream to high heaven. As we were driving out of the neighborhood, going as fast as we could, the damned thing smiled at us and faded away. The breeze scattered the leaves on the road where it sauntered after it had jumped from my car. It was gone, but the feeling of fear that it left us with would haunt us for months to come. 3 years ago, my daughter attempted suicide and ended up in CICU for 6 days, and inpatient directly after for 5 days. When she came home, unexplainable things started happening. We had lived here for 11 years, and prior to this nothing had ever happened. We were finding animals that had been dead a very long time on our back porch steps. 2 carcasses to be exact. A knife flew off our kitchen counter while no one was in the room. We even put the knife back on the counter and jumped to see if it would rattle off. It didn't move. My daughter confided in me that she felt a demon followed her from the hospital. She would sleep at night with headphones so she wouldn't hear the demon telling her things. I did call a local paranormal research team out to the house, and they found a spirit named Adam and a dark entity. They wanted to come back after they went through all the evidence, but my husband said no. The scariest thing that has happened to me in our house was when I was in bed and I felt like something was there. I opened my eyes just to appease my senses, not really thinking anything was there, and a very large, very tall, completely black figure was at the end of my bed. When I realized that half of the TV screen was blocked by this figure, I screamed and covered my head up. When I looked again, I just saw the TV and the dresser as normal. My daughter has been in and out of several facilities since the first attempt, 6 times in fact, and is a shard of the girl I knew and raised. I used to be fit and cared about my body, but I don't anymore. I have feelings of my own every day about taking my own life, but it's like they aren't mine, if that makes sense. I'm not suicidal, but somehow my mind thinks that I need to perish. It's so hard to explain, and sometimes I wonder if I'm feeling my daughter's thoughts. The most consistent physical thing in our house that happens is light bulbs exploding or blinking. I was using the bathroom and 2 light bulbs exploded and glass went everywhere. It was so loud and so much that glass went all the way into our bathtub. Our living room lights explode frequently, but never 2 at a time. Are we just going through a rough time in life? Or is there something more sinister going on? This is no joke. It is very real to us, and I don't know what to do about it. Any thoughts or opinions would be incredibly appreciated. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope everyone enjoyed tonight's stories. As I mentioned at the start, please be wary about summoning demons. It is something I do not recommend in the slightest. Demons can be dangerous, very dangerous. So yeah, don't go offering up your soul or your time, please. Things can get out of hand pretty quickly, and these are some of the more tamer demon stories. I've read some far more horrific ones in the past if you go through my previous stories. In any case, I'd like to give a huge thank you as always to my incredibly kind and amazing patrons, because your help and support keeps the channel running. If you'd like to donate as little as $1 a month to me on Patreon for some cool exclusive rewards and stuff, you can check all the info out in the description. If there's a story that you would like to share, you can send it to my email or post it on my Reddit page. Either are fine, and it is always incredibly appreciated. But with that being said, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.